In 1929, the United States stood at the crossroads of hope and despair. The Roaring Twenties had come to a crashing halt with the stock market collapse, plunging the nation into the depths of the Great Depression. Families faced hardship, dreams shattered, and a resilient spirit emerged. Yet amidst the economic struggles, a cultural renaissance unfolded. As the nation grappled with adversity, the film industry mirrored the resilience of the American people. Cinemas became sanctuaries, providing an escape from the harsh realities outside. The golden age of Hollywood was born, bringing iconic films that resonated with audiences hungry for inspiration. From the dazzling allure of musicals to the gritty realism of gangster epics, the silver screen became a canvas reflecting both the nation's struggles and its unwavering spirit. In the face of adversity, the United States found solace and inspiration in the magic of cinema, laying the foundation for the industry that would define generations to come. The echoes of that transformative era continue to shape the American identity in the silver screen, reminding us that even in our darkest moments, the power of storytelling can illuminate the path to a brighter future. Welcome to the 1929 draft. Welcome back, everyone, to Cinema 100. As always, it's William Delzeith and myself, Robert Gifford. We are, this is going to be our third year, 1929. We've already done 1927 with the jazz singer. We did all of 1928. We did the 6 movies there. And now we're looking at 1929 as our next exciting year in our quest, man. Where are you at so far with this project? Are you still at the same level of enthusiasm? Or are you like, holy crap, Robert, I can't believe I have another 98 years to do this with you?
No, this has been awesome. We're starting to see some repeat stuff. I think when we do our draft today, I've got a couple of movies that we've already seen. Some an actress that I'm probably going to nominate. Got another movie where got a director that might be recurring if we end up going that direction. So it's gonna be fun as we go to kind of see some of this history building itself because we had so much early on, these actors and directors and writers that we're seeing early in their careers, and it's going to be fun to see how that kind of plays out here.
No, I'm with you. The interesting thing to me is this kind of this interesting balance that we're going to try to do later on. We'll get to the draft, just so everybody knows kind of the structure of today's show. We're going to set the stage for you for 1928, and then we'll get to the draft at the end here. But what I'm finding difficult is, we want to get through these years at a relatively, at an efficient pace where we're still being fair to the year. But at the same time, you've got to balance out what you're watching too. The idea was to watch the best films of every year. Well, I'm finding early on, and I don't know if you've had kind of these issues too when we're researching these films, is that a lot of the trends of 1929, as we're kind of like still in that silent era, still there, but the talkies have worked their way in, and now you're getting full talkie features. Musicals tend to dominate the box office. So the question is, Will, and maybe this is a question I want you to chew on and answer later. The question for me that I've had a hard time is should we be picking the best grossing films? Should we be going off of the Academy Awards list? Or are we getting to some of the art films that you and I like and picking those because we think we have a hunch they're just going to be better films? So chew on that. We'll come back to it. But the year's 1929. Off top of your head, tell me the biggest elephant in the room that happens in 1929.
Yeah, sure. I mean, towards the end of the year, we've got the Great Depression, right? We've got the stock market crash. I think it was late October. I want to say the 24th. I had it earlier. Don't have it in front of me now, but late in October, stock market crashes. Things just start to fall apart. So, that's going to be interesting about this year is we're probably not going to see a ton of we're not going to see a lot of film kind of addressing that. It's going to be interesting going forward to see kind of how this affects, some of the storytelling, see if things kind of take more of a pessimistic turn or like, hey, things aren't all roses and chocolates, right? We got some serious issues that we need to work through. So,
Yeah, no, you're right. And we've discussed that a few times before.
mhm.
What I found to be interesting as I was doing research for this year, and just kind of like a couple of the key words I type in is like 1929 in the United States, like what comes up, you know what I mean?
Mhm.
Like what was the economy like? What was happening in the world? What was happening in the US in 1929? And, we started the year off, I believe we start off the year with, is it Coolidge? Is he the president? And then Hoover comes in, or do I have that backwards?
I think you're right. Hoover's in front of FDR, so that
Okay.
sounds right to me.
And what's interesting enough is that when I was doing research and you get to the Great Depression, that you're right, it happened in October. Um, by December 3rd, there's a quote by United States President Herbert Hoover. He announces to the U.S. Congress that the worst effects of the recent stock market crash are now behind the nation and that the American people have regained faith in the economy. Oh,
Hmm.
so little do they know. You know what I mean? Like it takes
Right.
a damn near a decade plus
Mm.
the residuals just in the American society and economy to get back on their feet, right?
Sure.
We
Yeah.
go through an entire Second World War before we can kind of get back to a place of, wealth and success by our standard here in this country. But you're right. Within the film society, I think it's going to take some time yet to kind of see the progression of, the toll of the storytelling that, the toll that the
Yeah.
depression takes on the storytelling.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, the stock market crash is just one part of it, right? It's a big part, but that's just kind of the leading cause of the Great Depression. You've got all the other kind of factors that kind of trickle down from this, or aren't even necessarily directly caused by this. It just kind of happening, uh, coinciding beside it. Like we've got the Dust Bowl where we've got this historic drought that takes place, and people are moving states and moving across the country to try to find work because of it. So it's going to be an interesting decade to see kind of how I know some of the novels that come out of the time, like The Grapes of Wrath, but it'd be interesting to kind of see how film addresses some of these issues.
It's funny because we talk about um, personal growth and development and the things that come from that. But like,
Hmm.
there's events in your life that happen, and there was a moment in the Great Depression before it got there that the first domino had to fall. Right? We don't know what that domino. I mean, we can pinpoint as best as we can, but like, there's too many moving pieces, right, for us to kind of say
Right.
it because of this gentleman or this thought or whatever, right? Because things are
Sure.
brewing long before things are put in action. Um,
Yeah.
we're at the end of the 1920s now, and it started off with a big party, right? And we're
Hmm.
getting ready to have this great, Great Depression that's coming, but it labors into the 1930s. And what I find to be the most interesting thing is that, well, maybe not necessarily the most interesting, but compelling enough, is that in the 1930s, you get an abundance of movies that are going to come out, right? We talked on the
Hmm.
show before about how some still look at 1939 to be this great year in film.
Right.
What I believe is happening over those 10 years is that the hard times are shaping storytelling, right? I think
Sure.
it makes, if not for the hard times that we go through as a society here in this culture, um, Hollywood might not get pushed to the next,
Right.
the next type of narrative, which I think is so desperately needed as we're talking about 1929 being a year full of musicals. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And interesting enough, like one thing that I think to keep in context too is like this is 1929 is roughly I think 12 years after the Bolshevik revolution in Russia. I'm pretty sure it was like 1917 when they kind of start to take power and they overthrow the monarchy, and then they kind of take over and we start thinking of Russia not as Russia but as the USSR. So you've got all these competing interests kind of, and Germany has lost World War I, and you have all of these their political kind of pains and uh, stress that they're going through as Hitler kind of starts to take more and more power. So it'll be interesting to kind of see like how, if we end up doing some more foreign films along the way here, and I might nominate a couple today actually. But it'd be kind of interesting to see some of the different, like the story that's being told from Russia or the
Yeah.
story that's being told from Germany. And, one of the things when you look at foreign films around this time is propaganda, right? Everybody's
Oh,
trying to use their stories for advancing the narrative. So that'll be interesting to kind of see too, because narrative is such a popular word nowadays. I mean, the last 8 to 12 years, it's become, the narrative is really important to what you want to say or what you want to do. So,
yeah, I've used it hell 4 or 5 times already in this 10-minute conversation. So shows you both how popular the word is and how limited my vocabulary is. But you're right. There is, we tend to think as Americans, sometimes I think we think very selfishly, it's not the right word, but in our box, our confined American right society and how it immediately impacts us. And I think that's commonplace. However,
mhm,
because of who we are,
right.
when things like the Great Depression come down and you have a stock market crash, we're on a global scale, right? It impacts the
Mhm,
world. And then you take in the issues that are happening across the world, like you just said, the Bolshevik Revolution, all the things that came from that. This is
mhm,
like, it's like we're getting to a point of a great reset for all these major players, on a global scale.
right.
But we're at the very beginning of like very hard, trying times that are coming up in this country. And what I
Right.
find to be interesting, and we're going to get into it here, and then I'll transition to it here in a few minutes, but that means there's less money for people to go to the movies, right? I mean,
Mhm.
there's less, obviously there's less money, but there's going to be less attendance happening at the movies. Um, Anything else on the depression before I kind of transition to another thought?
Um, no, I don't think so. I'm curious. You know, the only I'm always curious about what story has to say about like wealth and class. So I'll just be interested to kind of see if we find some films here from the U.S. over the next couple years that kind of tell a story about class and wealth. To see if those stories are changing, if we're kind of seeing villains come up in different areas that they didn't used to. Like, do the bankers all of a sudden become villains automatically in all of the movies that we're going to be watching, or is there going to be some nuance, or is it all going to be just? I'm just interested to see how much of that propaganda feels like propaganda, or if they're actually kind of going deep enough to make some valid points about some of the claims that they're making. So,
Yeah, because it'd be very easy to just, get an emotional trigger out of someone if, the bank is the villain, right?
right.
But then what I think a great, and this is, easier said than done for that time period, but
Mhm.
like what great writers and directors and actors should be doing is saying, okay, what if the banker was put in a position where there was a moral dilemma there, where they had to do this or else they would be out on the street. You know what I mean?
Right. Hmm.
And that's a dilemma that's just never going to go away when you have those type of moral quandaries. Like it just happened recently in 2020, with COVID. These hospitals and these doctors, these practices were incentivized to mark things down as COVID deaths so that they could get more money from the government coming in. And the issue with that is that there's an incentive for them to not necessarily lie, but stretch whether or not they, if they got hit by a car and they died in a car accident, but also had COVID that day, do you mark it down as a COVID accident? Do you mark it down? You get what I'm saying?
Sure.
That's kind of a stretch, but things like that were taking place. And what's interesting about that is that, when you think about it from a doctor's perspective, they shut down any type of, precautionary types of surgeries, right? And those
Hmm.
surgeries bring in so much money. So a hospital, just like a business, right? Just like any other thing, they're a business. They need money coming in so that they can continue to have their nurses and, the doctors on staff 24/7, 365 because they were overstaffed and they need to be able to pay these people. Now, you can really break down of how much they needed or if they were just trying to say their back ends, that's up to each hospital. But the point is there's a story to be told there if you wanted to, moralize the people that are the villains in most people's eyes. Does that make sense?
Sure. Yeah. No, I get what you're saying.
All right. What I wanted to do now is something that I wanted to kind of get into the geopolitical nature of where film was specifically, something that we probably should have touched on in 1927 and we didn't get to.
Okay.
But I want to touch base on this idea of in Hollywood in the 1920s. Will, are you familiar with the Hays Code? Or the Hays Law?
No.
Okay.
I'm not.
So a lot of it, when I was researching movies today to kind of, this weekend for the draft, I kept seeing films that would say pre-code film, pre-code musical, pre-code drama. And I'm thinking to myself, what the hell does that mean? So when I looked that up, what they're talking about is this idea, and this is kind of what I want to paint for you. So setting the stage for where film is at and where some of the Hollywood directors and studios are undergoing kind of a huge federal versus state dilemma, okay? And this dilemma would go on for a decade plus, all right? So here, let me set the stage for you. In 1922, the Motion Picture Association was established. They went on to hire a guy named President William Hays, okay? Now, William Hays was kind of like a conservative Republican under the Warren G. Harding administration. He was the former Postmaster General, all right? Now, he resigned from there in 1921 and decided that in 1922, he would be the first president under this newly established Motion Picture Association. They had two reasons for their establishment. Number one, it was kind of this committee of people that were working together with the studio heads to make sure that Hollywood was financially stable, financially successful enough so that they could continue getting investments from, Wall Street. All right.
Okay.
Now, the second notion, and this is where we get into these codes, is it was supposed to be an establishment to make American movies to have a clean moral tone. Okay? So now you kind of get where we're navigating to. So in 1924, William Hays creates this formula that basically was a loose set of rules that he would send out to filmmakers and studios, and he was hoping that they would self-regulate, the things and images and the profanity and the nature of the story that would be going into these films before they were put out into the public eye.
Yeah.
You and I both know as speeders, Will, what happens when you put a 55 mile per hour speed limit sign on a backcountry road and there's nobody around to see what you're doing.
Yeah, Robert gets a ticket.
Yeah, Will does it. Robert does. Yeah. Fair enough. Anyways, you kind of get the idea here. Yeah. When you're asking people to self-regulate, unfortunately, more times than not, they're not successful at doing it, right?
Right.
This is what gets interesting, though. The state versus federal starts coming into play. Now, in 1924, state by state, their stance on what's happening is they don't understand why there's a self-regulation process happening on a national level. They've put together, committees of their own, what they're calling boards of censorship.
Okay.
And if in films that are coming into their towns or their cities, if they're not edited by the kind of predetermined list of demands that they have, then they won't show them. Now, in the beginning in 1924, this is still kind of small, but over time, it grows and it grows and it grows. The big issue on the national scale was because William Hays was such a conservative Republican, he didn't believe in censorship. So what he did was he tried, you use the word propaganda, he tried to campaign against the general public to basically get them on his side. To a great effect, actually. He was he was very successful at what he thought of getting them on his side. But a lot of these power to bees within these, the more small time government, state by state, they took the power to put up a lot of these censorship boards. Okay, I'm getting a little long-winded. Now we move forward again. 1927, he came out with a list of don'ts and be carefuls. Again, really no enforcement behind it, because without studio help and without national government help, how is he going to get anybody to play by these rules? All right.
Yeah.
Again, what's interesting is the states, more and more states are having an issue with kind of the imagery that's being pushed out amongst the masses. And they are, it's said that by the end of 1929, 50% of moviegoers were not seeing the same movie that majority or that the other side of the country was seeing, because they were being censored. So much so they were being censored that it made the movie almost incoherent to the story. They had actually no idea what was actually happening. You take that, you marry it with the Great Depression at the end of 1929. I'm going to press pause on where the Hays Code and what happens until we get to that point for that year. But this is where we are. So you take in the Great Depression, you take in the fact that moviegoers are disgusted with the fact that they can't even see what they want to see. And you're getting to a point where you're going to start seeing a decline in the attendance and the amount of money pushing into these studios. And I can tell you, when you work with people of power, if you can hit them in their pocketbook, that's the only way you're going to get them to change. My long-winded take on this, but I wanted to get your stance on, where do you believe censorship falls when it comes to art in a free country? What is the place of censorship?
Yeah, so that's, I think it's a good question. I think censorship for me I do think there should be some censoring for age groups, right? So I think we do a pretty good job now. I've mentioned before, and you obviously know, but people who are listening, I've got 2 kids, and one's 6 now, and we're letting her kind of venture out into some, a little bit more serious material. And that's our responsibility, right? To watch things. Like, if I haven't seen it, should I be watching it with my daughter who's 6? Yes, I probably should, so that I know what's in it. So I know if she's ready for it, and what is she doing afterwards, right? Is she taking some of the language that's, funny, but maybe not appropriate, and saying it back to people? That's my wife and I's responsibility.
Right.
Now, when it comes to adults, censorship is, I just don't think there should be any. That's mostly because I think people ought to take in story, take in ideas, and if they don't agree with them, just be okay with not agreeing with them. And I just think it gets murky when you start drawing lines like that and saying, like, this is acceptable, but this isn't. It's not about what's moral. It's about what you think, the people who are making the rules. And I guess I fall with William Hays, right?
Yeah, William Hays,
I'd probably side with him with this idea that censorship is maybe not the best idea.
Well, you might side with him up until 1929, right? So I went a little bit further in the reading. We'll get there, and we'll see if your perspective on William H. Hays changes, or not H. That's Macy. Sorry, William Hays. Yeah. I want to read you a few things that Hays put into his don'ts and his be carefuls. And this kind of paints a picture of, again, still where we are in 1929, okay? Mm-hmm. And I'll let you decide which one you think stands out the most to me. A couple things that he put: pointed profanity by either title or lip, just anything that's blasphemous against religion, okay? God, Lord, Jesus Christ, anything that's being used on title plates or being verbally spoken that's not in a, to the respected manner of that environment, right? That's something. Illegal trafficking of drugs, any interference or sex perversion, right? You know, I'm thinking about these with a modern day brain, and I'm thinking to myself, check, right? Here's an interesting one. Do not show white slavery. Do not show sex hygiene and venereal diseases. Do not show children's sex organs, ridicule of the clergy, or willful offense to any nation, race, or creed. Now, those were the do nots. There was a whole list of be carefuls, like a use of firearms, the use of the flag, sedition, apparent cruelty to children and animals. So yada, yada, yada.
Yeah.
The one that stuck out to me the most was white slavery.
Yeah.
Right? In a world full of us showing black slavery, and, you know, again, that's a historical truth. I just found it interesting that do not show white slavery. What's your thoughts on just that thing you heard?
Yeah, I mean, well, that's just blatant propaganda, right? I mean, the entire country was built off slavery, and yet a lot of slaves were black, but there was also other, groups of people that were enslaved or very early on in our country, like the Irish, for instance, and the Chinese, again, when the railroads were being built, in the 19th century. So it's just propaganda. It's about power, right? And you can't show if you're white and you're a white nationalist, or maybe I shouldn't make that claim about William Hayes, but because I don't know for sure. But
Sure.
if you're concerned with keeping power in the hands of white folk, white folk, I just said that like I don't know, 82. But if you're concerned with that type of stuff, right? You put up rules so that people don't get ideas, and I think that's pretty clear what that rule is about.
No, I agree with you. And when we're talking specifically about censorship, I'm always torn on anything that has to do with there's a reason people debate these things, right? If it was easy, it wouldn't be talked about. You know what I mean?
Right.
So what I try to do is I sit in the middle and I listen. Okay, which side's going to sway me one way or the other? Or which side do I instinctively fall on? But I'm not married to any idea in this life. I have strong convictions towards, right? But if somebody was to present any idea that would make me go against, or, in contrary to an idea that I'm very strong on, and they do it in a compelling way, not just like their presentation of it, but like present compelling facts, I would be willing to go to the other side on something. I'm not married to anything in this world. With that being said, I kind of tend to fall on what you believe to be, virtuous in this path of as far as like how we should go about censorship.
Yeah.
The question then becomes like, should you apply that same type of logic towards like drugs, right? Should we, instead of regulating drugs, should we just make every drug legal and allow people to hopefully make the best decisions by themselves? But we've already had the conversation about self-regulation and how that impacts us as a society, right? If you don't wear your seatbelt, or if you don't abide by the speed limit and you're going too fast around a turn, you could inevitably kill me, right? So maybe that's not the same logic because there's no death that can come from it. But if I can point you to a place where because I watched this art influenced me, and then I went out and did this, that's where the debate comes in. I'm with you. I think in a perfect world, I think we should be able to do this. And even in a practical world, I still think we should be able to, when it comes to this type of art, we should be able to censor ourselves with what we see. I still find it pretty perplexing that we live in a country that still allows porn, right? But yet there's a lot of things that we can't see, like it would be, you don't want to see someone hurt an animal, right? On screen. But with that being said, there's still movies where like war movies where animals, horses, whatever, you see them getting blown up. I'm kind of reaching it all over the place, but you kind of get my point of where I was going with it. I'm with you though. Censorship should be something that each person, accurately and intelligently takes in and disperses for themselves. unfortunately, I'm always kind of two people. Like, okay, is that the world we live in? Should I, you know what I mean? Because ideally, as a school teacher, I used to say, there's no place for sex ed in the school, because if parents are doing their job, then school shouldn't even be talking on that subject, right? We should be talking about math and science. But because parents weren't doing their job in the 80s, we had a big uptick of STDs and HIV and all these things that came from it. The schools are left with no option.
Yeah.
So I'm two people at all times, Will.
Yeah, I get where you're coming from for sure, because I have a tendency to play devil's advocate, and regardless of what I believe, I end up, if someone says something, I'm just automatically, that's how my brain works, is I want to think of what the opposite, what the other argument, what the other side of that argument is. So I'm with you. I'm always kind of thinking about, because there is the part of me that just says, like, hey, this isn't that hard. Like, should drugs be legal? No, they're bad for people. Like, they're just not good for us. So we shouldn't allow them. But then there's the other part that's like, you look at other countries, or you look at Seattle, who's set up houses where you got people who can go someplace, take heroin safely. They don't have to worry about, dying while taking the drug of their choice. And there's options there too for, if they need help, like they set up resources so that they can try to get these people help. And so, like, I see those types of things too. And it's like, when you criminalize something, or when you make something evil or bad, it automatically makes it impossible to get out of those tendencies. So same thing here. If you start automatically saying, like, you should censor X, Y, and Z in a movie just because it's bad for us, like that, I'm never going to take heroin, right? I know that about myself. But I don't know. I guess I'm losing my train of thought here, but I think I'm with you. Always those two kind of, devil and angel on the shoulder, kind of arguing back and forth. So,
yeah, it's been my blessing and my curse throughout my life. It's kept me. I never looked at my life up until a certain point. I always thought I was decisive in decision making. And then I got to a place where I was like, holy crap, this is making me indecisive. You know what I mean? So then what I try to do is I try to put a time limit on how, especially if I have to make a decision on something, I'm like, okay, time limit up. Where am I leaning? Okay, let's go with that. And it is what it is. And hopefully I made the right decision, and all direction that way. But you never know. You never truly know. So.
Right. Yeah. Well, have you ever heard of the Dunning-Kruger effect? I'll try to be quick.
No, I haven't. What's that?
Yeah, so Dunning-Kruger effect is essentially like, the less you know, the more confident you are about your opinions. And then the more you know, the less confident you are, because you have so much more information. Like, it's impossible to kind of like really see the clear path to what's right, because you're considering so much more information. That's kind of, I used to, when I was younger, if anyone listening knows me, I was pretty decisive about my opinions, but I've lost some of that decisiveness as I've gotten older. So.
Yeah. That's part of being young though, too, right? Is like going through this,
sure.
You go through such a period where like you don't have a say. Like, you're in your house, you're grown up, you're 7, you're 8, you're 9, you don't really have much of a voice or a say in the world. Then you get to a place where like you realize that, hey, I have a little bit more freedoms. I have the ability to, live in a street and not care. You know what I mean? Like, whatever. I have that capability if I wanted that to be my lifestyle. So that gives you great freedom. With that being said, if you're somebody that doesn't want to, you have to make sure that you express yourself in a different manner, but still you're getting more of the respect from your peers, from your colleagues, from your family. You start getting more of a voice. And I was the same way. I remember when we talk about the coffee shop for me as like this great date in my life. I almost wish I'd never happened, because to what you were just explaining with the effect there, I like turned my grandfather against me for a couple of years, because I had to tell that man every single opinion that I had on everything that was going on, whether it was the TV unsolicited, whether he asked for it. It just got to a point where it hurt conversations, you know?
Yeah.
But then I got smarter, wiser, and I realized, you know, the detriment of how not important it is to share every thought you have.
Right.
And then, you know, 10 years removed from that, you realize, like, was that even the right thought? Did I even have the right conclusion? So anyways, that's 1929 in a nutshell with where movies are at as far as the politics of movies, you know, where society's at. You know, it'd be really kind of goofy if we talked about anything other than the Great Depression in 1929. There's so many other things that are taking place, I'm sure, but those are the big, you know, elephants in the room, so to speak. I think we should get to the draft because I asked you a question early on about the, you know, going forward with this project. I didn't think I was going to get stuck so quickly, Will. I thought it was going to be pretty apparent to what the best films of each year was. But I think in this early going, I think it's a little more difficult because there's a lot of experimental things taking place. There's a lot of people in studios still trying to figure out their identity and who they are. There's directors and filmmakers, actors and actresses. They're playing with the medium. I think, you know, so like what we do know that's been successful is musicals. You know, that brings the masses to the theaters, and why wouldn't they? You know, especially entertainment. They're there to kind of, you know, forget what's going on at home, you know. What direction are we supposed to go in with this?
Yeah, no, I mean, if you sit down and take a day to kind of look at a year like I did today, I, you know, spent a couple hours looking around trying to see if there's anything I recognized at first, like, hey, have I even heard of these movies? And there was one that I'd heard of. But, you know, if you go to Letterboxd, it's pretty cool, folks. If you don't know Letterboxd, if you go to Letterboxd, it'll tell you how many films are in that year, right? So if you go to Letterboxd and you search the year, if you go to the search the year, it'll tell you how many films are on Letterboxd for that year. And this one, there's over 1,000, right? So there's
Wow.
so there's
do you have the number for 1928 just for comparison?
I can do it real quick. If you don't mind, be easier on my phone. Give me 2 seconds. Because that's where I do most of my letterboxing.
That's where you do your letterboxing?
Mm-hmm. All right, so 1928. Oh, geez. Now I'm not going to be able to find it. This is going to be bad podcasting. So I'm going to stop. But you can find, and maybe that's something I can post at some point, how many movies there are from 1929. But you know, there's so many movies that we could be choosing one from, for one. The other thing that's complicated that we haven't mentioned yet is, like, if you go and you look at foreign films for 1929, and then you try to find out when they were released in the US, it's not for, you know, a couple years even. You know, there's some that come out the same year, but then one of the movies that I have on my list here doesn't release in the US until 1935. So, you know, there's that kind of dilemma too.
So I would have an answer for that one. And this is just for structure purpose, right? Whatever. So I've been using Wikipedia. Okay. I know people have their thoughts on Wikipedia, right? But Wikipedia is what I'm using as our release date truth. Okay. So if it was released in their native or their country in, you know, 1929, then that's the year we're going with. You know, a lot of these movies too have been like tinkered and edited or added to, and then they've been re-released a couple of years later, you know. Actually, one of the Academy Award nominees, I believe, of this year was the same thing. It was re-released a few years later with some new, you know, editing techniques and things of that nature. So yeah, you're right. That's a big part of it. But I think if we stick to that as our truth, we'll be good. That's the thing. It's like finding our truths, right?
Right. And the other thing too, that was complicated, and I don't know how long this goes, but the Academy Awards at that time were from, I think, April to April. So you
They
could
were.
get a 1930. You can go look at 1930 Oscar nominees, and it might be actual 1930 if it's early in the year. So
Right.
there's that added kind of complexity there where you can run into some issues. So finding the movies from that year, 1929, was pretty difficult today. Then there's the added, you start looking if Wikipedia is a good place for this because it'll tell you if you can actually watch this movie still, or if it's lost, or if
Interesting.
there's
Okay.
audio version. So, that's another thing I kind of took into when I was researching movies today, took into account. So,
Yeah, accessibility. That makes sense.
yeah.
I just something I thought of too. Actually, I wrote down, but it slipped me. Is we're new into this journey. A lot of these movies are firsts, right?
Mm.
Like the first all talkie, the first feature length all talkie musical, the first feature length all Technicolor feature film talkie, right? There's like a million first until we get to the place where all these things are on our backside. It's like, okay, we're trying to do the technical aspect as the same thing as the narrative aspect of these storytelling. You know what I mean? We're trying to get the whole scope. How do we balance that?
Right.
So,
Yeah.
as always, we're intelligent. We try to do, a good job of balancing it. That's why I find this draft, I think it will be so fascinating to go, because I just wondered if you're going right and I go left, or if we both have the same thought process. And that almost makes me feel like if we're both have the same thought process, I have written down a list of films here, just in case we did, that we need to discuss whether they should be in the running or not. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yep.
And that's what I think we should do with the second half of this podcast here. So I'm going to go ahead and let you have the floor. 1929. I'm going to let you have your first draft pick.
Oh man.
And, or maybe I should, because I got to be honest with you. I really only have one that I'm like stuck on.
Yeah. Why don't you go first? Because
Okay.
I've got a list here that I'm pretty happy with. So
Okay. Let me just for real sake, I just kind of want to get this out there. 1929. Here's some of the highest grossing movies of the year. Okay. The highest grossing movie of the year was the movie The Broadway Melody. It was an MGM movie, $2.8 million. Okay. Followed after that, you got The Cockeyed World, Gold Diggers of Broadway, Sunny Side Up, Rio Rita, On with the Show, Say It With Song, Showboat, The Desert Song, and The Hollywood Review of 1929. Okay. That's, that in a nutshell. I'm looking at it, and when you hover over this, it says, okay, Broadway Melody, musical, Cockeyed World, musical, Gold Diggers, musical. So without boring the listeners, pretty much, if not all of them on the top 10 here are musicals. I can tell you pretty comfortable right now as I look into this film or camera here, Will, I do not want to watch only musicals for this year.
yeah. No, I'm with you. That's for sure.
So,
No,
all right. With that being said, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I don't know if you want to talk about how we're approaching this, but honestly, for me, it's kind of like I want to watch at least one thing that was popular. I want to watch at least one thing that's kind of critically acclaimed, right? Where you go and you research and they say, this is on my, top 5 movies from that year. And you're kind of consistently seeing it. And then, I'm also looking for like, is this early science fiction? Is this early horror? Is this, I want to see kind of the whole landscape of that year, not necessarily like, hey, here's the best or the top grossing films, or these are the Academy Awards. I don't think that's what we should be doing. I think we should be trying to, because I don't have a genre. I mean, I have certain genres that I love more than others, but I like all movies, all sorts of genres. So I think I want to see that kind of whole picture when we're doing this. So
Yeah,
that's
and
kind of how I chose the movies.
I think I have the exact same approach as you. The problem is I find myself, here's my approach. So similar, right? So I start off like, okay, what were the highest grossing films? Do I recognize any of those films? Okay. I match those up with the Academy Awards and say, okay, should we be watching the best picture that won every year? That's an argument that can be made too, right? If they both coexist on the same list, then that to me says then we probably should be, right? Because both the public at the time said that this was a movie that was worth going to see, and the critics said that this was a movie that was worth going to see.
Yeah.
You know, the problem is that I get to a place where, like, I'm with you. I like all different types of genres, but I do have my preferences. And in 1929, I'm not seeing a lot of my preference, right? And when I finally get to one, I'm like, I have to almost ask myself, should I be contributing this to the draft? Is it not worth it?
Yeah.
And that's where I'm at. So I'm going to be honest with you. I'm going to draft some. And when we get done with this and we have our big discussion, if others should be in there or not, I could easily move some out and put in others in place. I just want to see how we're going to do. The final thought on this before I draft is I think our approach to this is going to change over time as we kind of get through the first, I would say almost maybe 20, 30, 40 years. We get to a place where movie going is like commonplace in American society, not just for the rich or the elite, but for everybody. And genres have all had their first and way behind it. And they're all kind of like, you know, perfecting their craft and their, you know, when you start getting to the 70s, I think we'll just pick the best movies, you know, or because directors found a way to make their genre fit into that category. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, no, I think that's fair for sure. I think there's probably going to be some, you know, because once we get into the 60s, I've started to actually see some of these movies because you know, before then I haven't seen, you know, I've seen the odd Casablanca, right? But, or The Wizard of Oz. I've seen those ones, but pretty limited. So it'll be interesting to see too, like as we get later in the you know, years here, if we have some kind of like hidden gems, right? Like I've seen this movie and you haven't, and I really think you should.
Right.
So that'll be fun too.
Yeah, and because I thought about that too. I'm like, well, maybe we'll do down the road a hidden gems episode where we just advise people to go and watch these. But that's, you know, I'm with you. I think we'll get a solid, you know, we'll come up with a list and then we'll talk about how long we will actually want to do it. I will admit this was the first year so far on our journey that I haven't seen anything, at least that I don't remember, that I've seen in this year. And with that being said, I also recognized, I think, maybe 2 movies this year, right? So this is going to be an interesting year. All right. Enough of the disclaimer. Okay. My first draft pick, I'm going to say it now because it doesn't really abide by the best film of the year when it comes to highest grossing, doesn't abide by the best film of the year when it comes to Academy Awards. It comes to the longevity of what people have kind of like their reception on this movie and how it's changed over time. And I'd be interested to see if you had the same one, but I'm going to go with January 7th release. I believe it was January 7th. I could be wrong, but A Man with a Movie Camera.
Okay.
And this is actually a documentary, Will, of Russia. And it's done so through an experimental way. I don't want to get too heavy into the plot and whatnot and bore our listeners right now. We'll do that on the show. Was this on your list at all?
I have it on. I actually have an honorable mentions list just in case we wanted to do something like that.
Okay.
I wasn't sure. I wasn't sure if we were going to be doing documentaries. But this is, you know, going back to my Letterboxd expertise. This is one of the highest rated films on Letterboxd for this year. So it was kind of immediately on my long list to take a look at. And if we're doing documentaries, I'm ready. We can watch this one for sure.
Well, I think the thing with documentaries documentaries when done well are very impactful. The issue with documentaries are, especially in 2024, are going to be, where's the truth? What's the motive? Who told this? You could rabbit hole and get to a very scary place where you're fact checking the fact checkers. And then you get to a place where you're like, yeah, but so the person that produced this believes in this and therefore it discredits everything that was ever said. I don't want to do that, right? What I do want to do is the movies throughout time. Like if there's a documentary or 2 throughout time that stood out in the mainstream eye, you know what I mean? You know, that's worth talking about. The reason I chose this mainly is because what's touted to be exciting about this film is how the director or the gentleman that's filming it, he shot it at a pace that's 4 times faster than the movies of this time. Something around 1,700 shots were used in this movie. It's been touted, like you said, on Letterboxd to be one of the best movies that come out this year. When I typed in 1920s best movies, it was on damn near every list, in the top 10 somewhere, if not one. So to me, that tells me, yes, it might be in hindsight, but we need to see this film, Will.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. This one sounds fascinating to me. And if we're open to documentaries, like I said, let's do it.
Well, I'll put it down. We'll lock it in later. It's just right now, it's on the table. Okay. All right. So you tell me what you see. What's your first one?
All right. Well, I think pretty obviously the one that we should probably be watching here is Blackmail by Alfred Hitchcock. It's a romance of Scotland Yard. So Alfred Hitchcock, I think this is a silent film still. I'm doing a little research on the fly here because I didn't write this part down. But yeah, it sounds kind of like Alfred. It sounds Hitchcockian, right? That's kind of a verb. To be Hitchcock, but feeling herself ignored, Alice agrees to go out with an elegant and well-mannered artist who invites her to visit his fancy apartment. So sounds like there's probably some interesting shenanigans that they're going to get up to, and borderline psychological. That's always a very prevalent theme in Hitchcock movies. So I thought, since it's here and it's available to watch, I thought this was a good one to start with.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that because this was on my list, but it wasn't on my final list. Okay. I wanted to make sure, and I'm not accusing you of this, by the way. I just wanted to make sure I wasn't in a hurry to get the Hitchcock, right? Like, sure. You know what I mean? Because we could fall into that trap and have it be like, well, then we do a Hitchcock film every year, but then, we're not really watching the best films that Hitchcock put out, which sure. Even that's a loaded thing to say because a lot of what he did was so great. But I do think it's worthy of being on there for this reason too. It'd be interesting to see where he's, his earlier work, and then to kind of see how it, because you've got this piece of film, which is Blackmail. Yep. When does Psycho come out? Is that like late 60s? Is that like 1960? Like how late is?
I want to say it's in the 50s.
Okay. But that's like 25 years. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. That's longevity at a craft. And we know in hindsight where he stands, but like, right. It's just interesting to see where he starts and to see what the public reception of him and watch it grow over time.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And one of the things that I kind of use Letterboxd, like film popularity and then ratings, as my base for like, hey, these are the films that people who watch a lot of movies think are good. And again, that night, if you go to the 1929 list on Wikipedia, they got a whole that last column says, hey, this one's available. So I thought this would be a good place to start, especially like you were saying, early Hitchcock. We don't need to watch every Hitchcock film, but I think this is a good one to kind of touch base on because it sounds pretty Rear Window-ish, right?
Oh, dude, I cannot wait. I love Rear Window. I wanted to go to Hitchcock's filmography real quick if I can. It's not going to give it to me.
I found out how many movies are in Letterboxd on 1929, and it's 1,563.
Oh, so slightly less than 1920. Oh, wait, that was in 1929?
Yeah, 1929.
How many movies were out? What my question was in 1928.
Yeah, so 1,524. So just a little bit more.
Okay, interesting. Okay, it was so much easier in 1928 for some reason. I think it's because of the first and what we were going with. Okay, so this is exciting. This is the first sound film for Alfred Hitchcock.
Okay.
All right. So everything else was a silent. I mean, there's probably some silent parts to it, but number 13. So Oh, wait. Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. This would be his 12th or his 13th film. So, yeah,
Okay.
he's on his way, man. He is definitely on his way. Okay. I'll put it on. I like the idea of putting them on the table and then drafting them at the end.
Sure.
Okay.
For sure.
Let me put, so the next one I want to put on the table, I think is an obvious one for the mainstream audiences. And I think we need to go right to the top. The Broadway Melody. It's the highest grossing film of that year and also won the Oscar. So I do like the idea of watching as many Best Picture, award winners as we can. Maybe ideally we should probably watch them all just so we can say we did. This might be our opportunity to do that. Or maybe that's a special show for another day when we talk about the years that we missed and why we missed them. You know what I mean? So, Broadway Melody is what I put on the table.
Okay, yeah, I've got it on my list too. I also noticed this is Harry Beaumont, which we didn't have a lot of fun with on Our Dancing Daughters, but that was definitely on my radar. So
I think this would be depending. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say I'm on board with that idea of making sure at the very least we're watching the Best Picture winner. I think that's probably a good idea. We'll have to make sure we're paying attention early on because of that weird April to April cycle, but I think we could probably take care of that.
Good news is I think by 1933, I think we get calendar year to calendar year. It fixes itself pretty quickly. So we got to go through it for a couple years, but I think it fixes itself.
Okay.
All right. So I don't have the year for that right now, but Man with a Movie Camera, Blackmail, and Broadway Melody. Yes, Harry Beaumont. You're right. I was hesitant, but again, we kind of got to go with both public and critics there. That might be our first two-time watch for a director. It'd be interesting to kind of keep that list as well. Okay.
Yeah, for sure.
What do you have? What's your second choice?
My next movie is a movie called Piccadilly.
Oh, yeah. Interesting.
So this one is about I'm just go ahead and read it. A young Chinese woman working in the kitchen at a London dance club is given the chance to become the club's main act. So, just kind of reading that instantly kind of gave me that the underdog story or the Cinderella moment where when you get your big shot. And, there's also probably some tension there between coming from the kitchen to all of a sudden being in the public eye. So I thought it looked interesting. It's got pretty decent reviews here on it being pretty good. So I thought this would be one that we could check out.
Yeah, and I'm looking at it, directed by it looks like Edwold. I'm not sure. Edwold? E.A. DuPont. E.A. DuPont. This is one of the, you try not to judge a book by its cover, but I seen the cover and I was like, all right, I'm a little interested. We'll see what's going on with Anime Wong. But yeah, no, I'm with you. It looks like, so I just wanted to see real quick. This says distributed in the UK and in the US. So is this an American film then?
Where'd it go on my list?
Oh, I'm sorry. It's a British silent. It's a British silent and sound drama. Okay, so it's a British film. Okay.
Yeah.
Alrighty, Piccadilly. All right, so I'm going to tell you kind of where my head was going with this next one. I mean, obviously, it's obvious where my head was going with this next one, but again, I just trying to get how important are the firsts versus,
Right.
And I'm gonna put two on the table right now, but we're gonna pick one later. Okay.
Okay.
How important is the first all Technicolor feature film talkie? Okay, I'm not even gonna tell you the movie right now, even though it's the 6th highest grossing film of all time. Okay, how important is that? Because we're gonna get long in the year here if we're not careful, right? Mm-hmm. And we match that up with, so the movie is On with the Show. Okay, 6th highest grossing film. Again, another musical. I want to be careful. I don't want to do too many musicals. However, we're matching that up with a movie called Hallelujah, which is the first Hollywood film to contain an entire black cast.
Mm-hmm.
I think I have my answer. I don't know. I didn't do enough research to tell you what a better movie is, but I think it's interesting to note that maybe we should be watching Hallelujah for what their perspective is that at that time period. Now, I didn't do enough research to know if it's directed by a black person or not, but it's got a black cast, so there's going to be some things in there that will be telling of that time period.
Yeah, and one thing that this was on my list. One thing that I noticed about this is there is some tension here because they made this movie. They made the movie with the intention of both black and white audiences watching it. So it'd be interesting to see if there's some stuff that's held back. There's some stuff that's maybe not fully voiced. It does look like the director is a white man.
Yeah, King Viter or Viter.
Yeah, so this was on my list too. So I definitely feel like this is one that we should at least be considering watching, for sure. Because it also seems like even the story itself sounds to me like it would be worth watching, even if there wasn't
totally agree.
some of the other stuff around it. So
totally agree. So let's just then, unless you want to make a case for it right now, should we take On with the Show off the table? It's the second musical. It was the sixth most important one of that year by money standards. But it is the first all Technicolor feature film talkie. So just thought I'd throw that out there. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think if I were arguing, I would probably argue against it. I've got other stuff that I would rather watch. I don't even have that one on my list. So
agreed. I'm with you. It's off. We got one off. Sometimes it's just about crossing off the list rather than putting it together. What do you got?
Another interesting note about Hallelujah is it released on August 20th, which is my birthday. That's
see, then
cool.
it was meant to happen.
So I guess I don't know how many movies we're trying to watch because
put one more. Put one more on. I'll put one more on. Oh, I started, so you get two more. Okay, and then let's argue whether or not we should be watching them or not at the end here.
Okay. Oh man, so if I get two more, there's part of me that wants to watch Woman in the Moon. It's Fritz Lang, and he's famous for Metropolis, but I'm a huge sci-fi fan, and I've seen Metropolis before, so I know that he's a good, if not great, director, and I'm just kind of curious about this movie. But I think I'm gonna put on a movie called My Grandmother. It is a movie that came out of the USSR, so it doesn't release in the US for quite a while. After 1929, it's by Kode Mikaberdiz. I'm not sure how to say his last name there, but I'll just kind of read the synopsis here for you. The protagonist, a lazy pen pusher, gets the sack for his bureaucratic idleness and learns that the way back into the job market depends on getting a letter of recommendation from a grandmother. So obviously here there's probably some, communist propaganda a little bit going on here. But I gotta be honest, I'm pretty curious about this movie. It sounds like it's going to be pretty interesting.
I'm having a hard time. Where are you finding this? Oh, there it is. I found it on IMDb. There we go.
Okay.
It was not on Wikipedia anywhere. So.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So this is, I could go either way on this one. I would understand why maybe we don't want to get too much into foreign movies, but that's kind of where I'm at with my list. Is I'm kind of stuck with foreign films at this point.
Okay, so My Grandmother. All right, then the only last one I had on my list, just to round it out then, or I guess, I don't know if that's 7 or 8, I've lost track, but anyways, the last one I had on my list was a movie called, let me get it back up because I moved from yours, Escape from Dartmoor, or also goes by a list called A Cottage on Dartmoor. Okay, have you seen this one at all?
It's on my list. I'm
So
glad you
here's,
nominated.
yeah, so here's what it says right off the get-go. It says it out Hitchcock's Hitchcock, right? That's the tagline on this one. And
Okay.
just, it's a former barber escapes from a high security prison, and we see flashbacks of a story of an escape from the lonely high security Dartmoor prison. I'm not sure, but I think I looked this one up on Letterboxd. It's got almost a 4-star rating, which is pretty telling for a time period. You know, I think it's at like 3.9. I don't have my Letterboxd up anymore, but if you can bring that up,
3.9. You're right.
3.9. To me, I was like, man, this might be the best movie we like, top to bottom, we watch. You know what I mean, for our taste. So I was like, you know what? I'm gonna put it on there. We'll put it on the table. If it doesn't get there, maybe I'll just watch it on my own. But I wanted to at least give it, you know, like you said, honorable mention. I wanted to mention it. So,
All right.
so here's what I have. Just double check with me.
Sure.
Man with a movie camera, Blackmail, Broadway, the Broadway Melody, Piccadilly, Hallelujah, My Grandmother, and whatever one you want to call it. I'm going to call it Escape from Dartmoor. So I guess we have 7. Did I miss one?
Nope. I just have my last one here. And then
Oh, that's
we'll
right.
be
Yeah,
at
sorry.
8.
You had 2. I went first. Yep.
Yep, that's okay. I'm torn between 2 other foreign films on this list, right? There's one that
Will's fighting for a
called,
spinoff show. He wants to do the
I am.
Cinema 100, the foreign edition.
Yeah. So one I'm interested in, but it's silent, I'm pretty sure, is called Diary of a Lost Girl. Not sure
Yep,
if you saw anything about this,
I
but
did.
this one
Yep.
looks fairly fascinating, especially given kind of some of the other, women's rights and abortion stuff that has come up over the last couple years, to kind of see and get a take on this type of thing from 1929. And then there's another one called Un Chien Andalou by Luis Buñuel. And he's kind of a very famous, I want to say French director that I haven't seen a lot of his stuff, but I know that he's kind of surrealist. So a lot of his films kind of, are about something, but they're not about something else, So
Okay.
I'm kind of curious about that one as well. I think I'm gonna go. I think I'm gonna go Diary of a Lost Girl.
So
Because
I'll tell you,
yeah.
that was one that I thought hard about.
Hmm.
Okay, so as a partnership, I'd be willing to go that route, just because you're right. We're getting this. We're getting a little Britain. We're getting a little German. We're getting a little Russia. We're getting a little America. We're
Yeah.
getting a scope of where the world is at right now, and I think
Yeah.
that does kind of help set the table a little bit with, films that will come out,
Mhm.
especially as we're probably going to focus very heavy on America during the
Yeah.
1930s because of the thing that we're going through. So,
Sure.
um, yeah, I'm with you. So, Diary of a Lost Girl. So I've got 8 of them now.
Okay.
Here's the big question. When I think about the scheme of like where 1929 is going to fall on the scheme of what we're trying to achieve, right? I
Hmm.
think it's going to be, I could be wrong. I could be wrong, but for the fact that we haven't heard a lot about these films, there might be a reason for that. They might not have kind of stood the test of time. I don't know that we're wanting to dedicate 2 months of our journey to these 8 films.
Sure.
Make Mr. Devil's Advocate, make a case against that, unless you don't have one.
Um. Yeah. I mean, I think the case here is that this is going to be the last time we're dealing with films that we're probably going to be watching silent. So I think that is kind of an interesting place to kind of. I don't know if I can make the case, Robert. Because I do see these 8 films and think, yes, I kind of want to watch all of these. But again, I think it just kind of comes back to what we want to have time for too. And I think if we're sticking to 6 for the time being, or even if, maybe this every once in a while we make an exception and watch 7 early on, we could talk about that. Because most of the stuff on here I think we both had anyway. So I don't know. I think if we went 6, we'd be good. But if we wanted 7 and we made the exception and said, hey, a man with a movie camera, that's our exception. That's number 7. Maybe that's what we do.
Well, let's look at this real quick. So let's look at the ones. I'm going to mark the ones that we both had. A man with a movie camera. Was that on your list?
Yes.
Okay. Black male didn't make my list, but it was there. I'd seen it. I just went away from it for other reasons that I said earlier. Broadway Melody, was that both on our list?
Yes.
Okay. Piccadilly was not on mine, but Hallelujah, I think, was both. And Diary of a Lost Girl, I think, was the last one that was there.
Okay.
So I would say let's do, for sure we have those 4. Now the question becomes Escape from Dartmoor, My Grandmother, Piccadilly, or Blackmail.
Escape from Dartmoor was on my list too. I think that one for sure.
So why don't we do this then? Maybe I could do an editorial, but I'd be willing to see where I'm really interested to see where you made a good compelling case for Hitchcock, right? Mm-hmm. So unless you have one, because it's your picks that are left, I'll let you pick the remaining one of the 3. So it comes down to Blackmail, Piccadilly, or My Grandmother.
Oh man, that's not fair because I really want to watch Piccadilly.
Well, then we watch Piccadilly and we find another Alfred Hitchcock down the road.
No, we're doing Blackmail. We can't skip this one, I don't think.
First sound, Blackmail. So here's where we are. I don't have them in order. I don't have the dates, but that's okay. So for those that are paying attention and keeping track at home, here's the 6 that we're going to watch for the 1929. We got Man with a Movie Camera, which I believe will be the first film that we do watch. It came out in January 7th. All right. I don't know if maybe you can do a quick, Wikipedia of these movies as I say them to you.
I got all of the rest of them written down after that.
Okay. So Man with a Movie Camera came out in... Yep, right there it is. Just double checking my work. Came out January 7th, 1929. It's only 68 minutes. It's a Soviet Union film, a Soviet Union documentary. So we'll start there and then tell me what you have for the rest of them.
Okay, so Blackmail is July 28th of that year.
Okay.
I've got Broadway Melody is February 1st. Hallelujah is August 20th. And then Diary of a Lost Girl. Oh man, these were 2 that I wasn't 100% on because they were foreign. So
do you want to go back and put Piccadilly on there or are you talking about the date? You're talking about the date.
The date, yeah.
Okay, gotcha. Let me look it up for you real quick. Let me see.
Okay.
Diary, because I thought I saw that one. Because I had the same issues as you when I was looking at like Oscar films. I was like, is this actually 1929 or is this 1930? It came out in September 12th, 1929.
Okay. Where did that one stop? And then Escape from Dartmoor. That's the other one I don't have.
Okay, Escape from Dartmoor. That movie came out in October. It just says October 1929.
Okay. So we'll be watching A Man with a Movie Camera, number 1. That's January 7th. Broadway Melody, February 1st will be number 2. Number 3 then will be Blackmail, which was July 28th.
28th, yep, Blackmail.
And then Hallelujah will be 4th. That's August 20th. Diary of a Lost Girl, September 12th, will be number 5. And then Escape from Dartmoor in October, so that will be number 6.
Yeah. I'm okay with this list. I mean, the truth is we've got the top of the top. You know, we've got the mainstream covered. with the Broadway melody. And then you get, I think it's important to dive into Hitchcock. I do. I think you made a compelling case there, because when we're talking about film and the longevity of it, when we look back, it's probably going to be more important that we watch this Hitchcock film rather than, the fifth Harry Beaumont film, who's not somebody who's touted to have been a innovator in the field. You know what I mean?
Right.
I think early on, we're going to find a lot of the Harry Beaumonts of the world, but like when we look back in retrospective of what this, what films are to us, and we're not going to talk about the Harry Beaumonts, unfortunately. I'm sure he's got his cheerleaders out there and his champions. It's just, in the spectrum of where we're at, he falls on the other side.
We can skip a couple Hitchcocks, but Hitchcock is that director that all of the other directors spawn from, right? The ones that we love, and then the generation after that, it kind of traces back, I think, to Hitchcock. So I think it's really important to try to, at the very least, watch his first full talkie. So
I'm with you. All
right.
I think we got a well-rounded list, my friend.
I do too. I'm glad we're not watching My Grandmother. I don't think that was. I feel like I might love it, but it might not be worth talking about. So,
well, you talk about your situation a lot. For those of you that might not know me, my grandfather, my best friend in the world, passed away a couple of years ago. I moved in with my grandmother to kind of help her with the transition, and then it's to a point now where it's like, Robert, am I overstaying my welcome? Probably. I don't think I am. I'm sure she doesn't think that, but. I watch my grandmother every day. She watches me, so I don't need to see this film, Will. But with that being said, a couple notes for the fans out there. I should have said this on the front end. I'll do a better job. Cinema 100 podcast is something that you can find on all your social media and find it on email. What we really want is engagement from you guys. And, maybe as we get going down the road, maybe we'll have a critics pick. I'll put some polls up on Instagram, and I'll put some polls up on TikTok, and we'll see, where it kind of leans with the popularity on there. Maybe they'll pick one for us to watch, not the critics, but the fan pick. You know what I mean? Here's where you guys can find us. You want to email us? You got any questions? Maybe we'll spend the last 5 minutes of a show talking and answering your questions, or just giving your takes on things. Because we've already had some really interesting comments through the first episode alone. But go to cinema100podcast@gmail.com. You can talk to Will and I both there directly. If not, you can go to Instagram. And once again, that's cinema100podcast at Instagram. And then on TikTok, you can find us at the very specific. Let me just make sure I have this correct. I believe it's just Cinema 100. When I click on it, it brings us to Cinema 100 podcast. How about that? I was very, very strategic in my way of doing things. So yeah, those are the three places you can find us. Instagram, TikTok, YouTube is another way. If you guys want to watch us online, you can go to 3 Dots Media. That's the people who produce this show. And you'll find some other shows on there as well if you want to check those out. So, but Will, I'll give you the final thoughts, man, on 1929 and what we're getting ready to dive into.
Well, hopefully these movies don't bomb as bad as the stock market did. So
I'm going to edit that out.
Right off the cliff.
I'm just joking. That was perfect. It's like dad joke number 1 right there. All right. We'll see you guys down the road. Thanks for joining.
All right. We'll see you.